So it's great to be with you, and I hope everyone's enjoying the conference so far. So here's our agenda for the next. Here's our agenda for the next 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of our journey over the last year with regard to learning preferences for our associates at Cognizant. And I'm going to tell you why you might care about that. I'll introduce Cognizant and myself for broader context. And then I'm going to tell you about our initial learning preferences survey and how that went. And a bit of a hint, it didn't go great, to be honest. And then I'm going to tell you what we did about that and what we found out when we fixed our survey. We're going to look at how we train at Cognizant and what we learned. And then I'm going to finish with a discussion on what might change, if anything, post-COVID. And I'm hoping all of you are going to give me your thoughts on that as well. We should have plenty of time for questions at the end. And if there's anything that you'd like to ask, then please do so along the way. I'm going to check in with Imsusangla and we'll monitor chat. So if there's any questions that pop up along the way, please let us know.
Sure, we'll do that.
Just want to get off video. There we go. All right, so if you're a learning professional, and I think everybody here should be, you've probably worked with a client, whether it's internal or external, to design a training solution. And in my past experience, it's often myself and the client that is making the decision on the modality of how that delivery is going to happen for the learners. I think it's very rare that we ever reach out and ask the learners themselves on how they can best interact with the education that you want to provide. So maybe you went with the fastest option or the cheapest or the easiest to design or the path of least resistance, whatever that is. And we obviously want to consider the best way to transfer knowledge, but do we really know what modality our learners would prefer when we're delivering content? So we decided we should survey our learners at Cognizant to help figure out their preferences. And we learned a lot. In a moment, I'm going to tell you about Cognizant to give you some context for that. So we learned a lot, and even more when we initially went about it the wrong way. Kind of doing it wrong helped us learn more than we might have otherwise. What I hope to share with you is not just what their preferences are, because you may or may not care about Cognizant associates, but I also want to share the journey. I think the journey is important because that might help you decide whether you want to listen to your learners. I hope you do, and enable you to do it in the right way to begin with. So first, a little context about Cognizant, and I'll give you 20 seconds or so to review this slide. So you can see we're pretty big. We're global. We've got lots of people, over 300,000. 160,000 of those are in India, about 50,000 in North America, and we generate a decent amount of revenue. But what is it that we do? Well, we compete with IBM and Accenture to transform the digital economy for our clients. And that's across every industry. I mean, literally every industry. Cognizant is probably the biggest digital consulting company that you've never heard of. We typically haven't invested a lot in marketing, so our growth has been organic and solely due to our customer success and their satisfaction. However, I think brand recognition is most likely about to change because we just announced recently that we're going to sponsor a Formula One racing team for 2021. So people might at least recognize the brand, although they may still not know what we do. Certainly my parents don't. Let's take a look at our training organization. So we provide professional skills training like management and communication skills, as well as technical skilling on over 3,000 technical topics. For example, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and the Internet of Things. Last year, we trained over 135,000 associates worldwide, and they spent over 12 million hours in learning. We onboard between 12 and 20,000 new college graduates every year. We've invested over 100 million in the Cognizant Education Foundation to reskill and upskill US workers for jobs in the digital economy. In India, our volunteers from Cognizant focus on STEM, and globally we work with the World Economic Forum to close skills gaps worldwide. So that's Cognizant and our education team. So a little bit about me as well for context. So I've been a learning professional since kicking off my career in 1995 as a technical instructor and instructional designer. I've worked in a number of different industries myself, with telecom, logistics, healthcare, and now digital technologies. Since about 2000, I've been leading learning organizations almost exclusively in the tech field. I'm originally from England, so I live in Denver, Colorado now, but originally from England. I moved here in the late 2000s. I have absolutely no interest in American sports. Believe me, I've tried, but I just can't do it. I am a lifelong and forever Arsenal fan. That's not really relevant to the rest of this, but I thought I'd throw that in there. I completed my Master's of Education at Colorado State University in Organization, Performance, and Change back in 2012. And I now lead learning services for Cognizant, which is a team that supports behavioral, technical, and platform training. We have instructional designers, we have our own learning technology team that builds digital content, project managers, and our own delivery support team. So I think that's everything for context that I wanted to cover. So let's take a look at this project. So the survey idea that we had started because as a team, we were reading a book, Jane Hart's book called Modern Workplace Learning in 2018. Now, I love this process. What we do as a team is we'll take a book that's about our field, learning in some way, and then we'll work through it as a team. So we'll do things like weekly quizzes and hackathons type activities. We'll have discussions on what we think are hot topics, and this learning preference was one of them. And then we'll really dig into it as a team, and I think that helps everybody reach consensus on what we think is important about learning within our organization. Now, Hart's position on learning preferences is that learning preferences have changed in the modern era, and that modern learners have a very strong preference for peer-to-peer learning and learning via self-discovery. You could think of this as the Google effect. And then she supports her position by surveying her public every year. And she gets about 5,000 responses from this global survey. And I'm going to share now a view of that survey. And again, there's a lot of data here, so I'll give you a few seconds to look at this, and then I'll zero in on a couple of things. So the percentages that you're seeing are the sum of people who said that each category was either very important or essential, and the highest two categories on a 4-choice scale. So the key thing to note here is that classroom training is right at the very bottom here, only 30% of respondents. And so that caused our chief learning officer to ask if we should stop doing classroom training altogether, because in his words, everybody hates it. And you can see that e-learning wasn't much better at 39%. And if you think about it, this model, the way this data is shaping out, kind of aligns to the 70-20-10 model, where you've got people showing that a preference for experience over formal training. So we thought we should, before we reacted to our chief learning officer's response, we thought we should survey our own people, because the Jane Hart audience is not the same as the Cognizant audience. So we should survey our own people and essentially replicate the survey, which is what I'm going to show you on the next slide. So this is North America, this data, but we also surveyed India, we surveyed APAC, and we surveyed Europe, and essentially we got the same results in every location. So I want to compare this with the prior slide, with Jane Hart's slide, and point out a couple of things. So I'm not doing a side-by-side comparison, but I'll just remind you of, first of all, we can see that e-learning jumped from a rank of 10th to 39th, sorry, with 39%, to a rank of 3 with 78%. So e-learning moved a long way. We can also see that ranks number 1 and 2 were exactly the same. And although classroom training wasn't dead last anymore, it wasn't really faring that much better. It moved up to 9th place. So this is all very interesting, and I think led more credence to our chief learning officer's position that maybe we should stop doing in-person learning altogether. So we had to consider how we were going to respond to that, because that would mean a massive and seismic change to our learning organization if we were to follow that path. So we thought about this, and we found that the question we had to ask was why. And so although our results were somewhat matching to Jane Hart's survey, there was something that was definitely bothering us. And when we were receiving training requests, our clients weren't asking for the kind of things that the survey was pointing to. Our clients are still asking for classroom and e-learning and digital content that's specific to learning skills. So we wanted to dig into that and figure out where this gap or disconnect was coming from. And so we went back to the original survey and we took a closer look. And we figured out a couple of possible reasons. The first of which is the question itself that Jane was asking. Now, Jane Hart's question is phrased in a very specific way. And here's that question for you to take a look at. So Jane is asking about usefulness, importance, and value. We're a bit premature on the survey, on the poll, actually.
Oh, okay.
3 more slides.
All right, Matthew, if you can stop the polling for now. Yes.
Okay, so in Jane's book, this is the question she's asking. And although usefulness, importance, and value are important, they definitely don't equal preference. So Jane's inferring preference from 3 things that are not preference. So that's kind of an important thing to take note of. And then this is also from Modern Workplace Learning. It shows, I think this is correct, that learning often begins in a very scheduled way, and it moves towards autonomy over time as people build skills and through experience. So what we might infer from this chart is that if we use words like usefulness, importance, and value when we're asking about training modalities, those who are furthest away from the need for courses might value them the least. If you're an expert in something, you don't want to go take a class on that thing. That makes sense. But at Cognizant, we're in this constant cycle of learning and relearning. Technology is changing at an ever-increasing rate. So we're constantly losing our autonomy and needing to start all over again. So although learning on the job as part of daily experience is still critical and important, if you need a heavy lift, if you're learning some new technology for the first time, then perhaps learners might still prefer a scheduled event with an expert in the room where you can ask questions and interact. We didn't know, but we were suspicious of this based on our experience. And then there's a second reason. So let me share that. And the second reason is context. So this is where we want to open the poll if we can.
Okay, Matthew, if you can set the poll, now's the time. Yep, the poll is up.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll here. We're at just over 70% or so of people that have voted. So let's end the polling. And I'm going to share the results. And we can see that 33% of you went with a book of matches. The pocket knife won by 66%, and the cage only got 1%. So book of matches, 33%. Our cage, only 1%, and our pocket knife, 33%. So now let me give you some context for that poll. Does anybody want to change their mind? So context makes a very important difference to the questions you're asking and the answers that you're going to get, especially in a survey type situation. So this made us think that we needed a lot more data. And I should check, Sangla, do we have any questions yet?
Not any questions that I can see.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So what did we learn from this entire process? Here's our conclusions. First, the questions you ask in your survey really do matter a great deal. You've got to be careful about inferring things from a question if you're not specifically asking for that information. That's why so many surveys seem to be about the same questions, but worded slightly differently. And that's to remove or reduce any bias interpretation. Second, when you see someone else's survey data, you just saw mine, don't just accept it as gospel. We could have eliminated our entire instructor-led training program in favor of, in quotes, a more modern workforce learning approach. But when we did the survey ourselves, we found out that our learning method required a lot more context. And finally, I think if you get the chance, I encourage you all to directly ask your learners about their learning preferences. So many times we're making that decision for our people, and I think we can do a better job of meeting their learning needs when we really know what learners want. So what do we do here at Cognizant? So this is how we respond to our learners at Cognizant. We basically try to do everything. We're so big with so many needs across so many geographies with so many things happening all at the same time that it's not really an either or situation for us. It's more of an and also situation. So our philosophy is to support curiosity with the tagline, open, wonder, and learn. And we help learners take accountability for their learning and contribute to the learning of others. We offer not only courses for the heavy lift that are in person and using virtual technologies, but we also offer a lot of self-paced e-learning. We have hybrid modalities like hackathons, we use case studies, we do micro-credentialing. We also offer a ton of self-paced and on-demand resources. And then we fully support social learning and social learning tools, such as Yammer, as well as mentoring programs. We run a World Cafe session, which is our fancy name for brown bags. And then in a world with a wide array of learner preferences, it's just awesome to be able to meet those learner preferences in the widest possible context. But it's important, what we didn't do was kill our instructor-led program, because I think that would have been devastating to the learning at our organization had we followed blindly the Jane Hart survey. So now I want to run another poll and look into the crystal ball. So Matthew, if we can bring up that second poll. So I'd like to hear what you think about the future in a post-COVID world, because the poll we did was before COVID, and people's experiences have certainly changed over the last year. So do we see any major shifts? Again, we're at about a minute and 70% of people have voted. I'm still seeing some activity, so I'll just hold tight. Oh, there we go. All right, so I'll share the results. And what we're seeing here is based on an overwhelming majority here. 85% of you think that a return to in-person will happen, but it will be at a reduced volume with heavier use of virtual and digital learning going forward. So I kind of agree with that to some extent. I'm certainly seeing, because of COVID, clients that previously would not accept virtual or e-learning of any kind now being a lot more open and accepting of it. I do have an anecdote. We had one external client recently that just signed a contract for 12 months worth of training for this year, 2021. And they put a clause into that they wanted it to be a 60-40 mix for delivery. 60% of what they're asking for will be virtual, and that's to cover the first half of the year into maybe July, August timeframe. And then once we're fully past COVID and everyone's been vaccinated, they want us to return completely to in-person. So the other 40% is for the end of the year that will be in person once it's safe to travel again. So that client is definitely looking for a complete return to kind of what would have been described as prior norms. What I'm expecting from my internal customers is that, as I said a little bit ago, we've just proven how well we can run virtual programs. We're getting essentially the same results, if not in some cases better results and better outcomes for some of our technical programs. So I think in-person classes will be rare for a lot of our technical stuff internally to Cognizant, because we can save on travel, we're getting good results. I think wherever travel is going to be a necessity, those things will only become virtual. However, as I look at these three options, I think if we add some context to it, so the return to in-person at the same volume, I think that will be true for sales training specifically. I think that a lot of sales programs, the behavior and the mentality of our sales teams tends to be, they want to be social, they want to interact with their peers, they want to interact with an expert, and I think being in classroom will be the way that will happen in our sales organization. I think for professional skills, communication skills, that what's highlighted here in the poll with the 85% of you, that we will return to some in-person, but most of that's going to be moving towards virtual and digital, because we've now proven that we can do it and we can do it well. And so I think on the third one, I think in-person eliminated and going exclusively virtual and digital, that will likely be true of our technical classes. So I kind of see all three of these things playing out, but again, slightly different depending on the type of learning and the learners themselves in terms of what we'll be delivering.